Oh. Hey everybody, welcome back to Escape Reality Films. We're doing something different today. This is a project I've been wanting to do for a while, and you all have helped push the channel to where it is now, and I wanted to reward you all. And plus, it gives me an excuse to stop procrastinating. Today we'll be talking about one of my 3 favorite franchises. We're talking about the Scream franchise. Before I go deeper into this, I will be discussing some very serious topics regarding depression and PTSD. If you or someone you know is being impacted by any of these issues, please don't be afraid to seek help. If you're in the US, we have the 24/7 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline that you can call or text at 988. They also have chat options on their website. Remember that no matter what, there are people who will care about and love you. Now back to the video. I plan to go through every film and the show within the Scream franchise, as I want to explore the common themes throughout the franchise and what I think Kevin Williamson, Wes Craven, Aaron Kruger had to say, at least in this part. And this will be a multi-video series, with this video in particular focusing on the first 4 films, which I will be calling the Sydney era. For now, I'll be ignoring anything that we might already know about Scream 7 when this video is being made, as I will absolutely be giving my unfiltered thoughts about that at the end of the series. For now, just know when I talk about the Sydney era, I will be referring to Scream 1 through 4. When I talk about Scream 5 and 6, they will be referred to as the Carpenter series era, and the TV series will just be the TV series.
Everybody got that? Good!
Let's dive right into this. We start off the bat with what might be one of the most famous opening scenes to a slasher film, where we immediately get one of the ongoing themes that the franchise will draw back into. In this case, everybody in the Scream universe watches horror films, or at the very least has extraordinary movie knowledge. I will say that while I enjoy Kevin Williamson's writing and filmography, his dialogue very much follows the same sort of pattern you'd see in a Tarantino film, where it's not quite how someone would talk, but it's close to how people that are really interested in the topics that are brought up would maybe talk about them. Like, me and my friends would definitely talk about films the way you'd see in Scream, but if I were having the same conversation with my parents, it wouldn't sound the same. We'll definitely come back to this, though, as for now we see this theme played out in the phone calls, with this one being very specifically about the trivia of popular slashers. Interestingly, slashers were in decline when this film came out. By this point, a lot of the major slashers, Friday the 13th and Halloween, to use the examples they give in this cold open, had already had multiple sequels, with a lot of people actually getting tired of those franchises. Halloween was already about to be soft rebooting in 2 years with H2O, with the uncredited help of Kevin Williamson, ironically. And Friday the 13th had just had Jason go to hell, and was about to send him into space, which we know is basically the point your slasher film series has died in terms of ideas. Even Wes Craven's New Nightmare was essentially the prototype of what Scream would become, and most people didn't really like that take on Freddy, with him being a lot more silly than scary in what was the Elm Street series' 7th film. So, horror fans wanted something different, which all makes it interesting to have our first main victim, Casey, though Steve might be able to take credit for that role, really, be knowledgeable for the most part of what at this point was slowly becoming a dying subgenre. We do see, however, a slight dig into the idea of these ongoing franchises, as Casey fails to know who the killer is in Friday the 13th, because as a franchise, and by the time Casey would have been actually watching these films, it is Jason. She is correct, and our mystery killer hadn't specified, but the mystery killer uses this to be a gotcha, and now specifies he was talking about the original film, which had, at the time, had a more grounded idea of this grieving mother, Pamela Voorhees, as the slasher, because Jason was a dead child in the original film, though it does end with him doing a jump scare from the water, which is where the sequels decide to make him the slasher for the series. After getting this question wrong, we lose Steve, and Casey makes an attempt to escape, and we get to see the way our killer moves. You could say he's like a ghost, and the script says to hold for laughs. The suspense we immediately get, though, with the music, the stove on fire thanks to the popcorn, the possible chance of escape with Casey's parents literally right there on the driveway, is perfect. You almost think Casey could escape, not only because of some of these possible chances of luck, but also if you are knowledgeable in film, you know Casey is played by the famous child actor Drew Barrymore. Casey even gets a good smack into our killer, but then he appears from the opposite direction of where we just saw him, following a lot of the slashers at this point being almost supernatural in how they'd attack our protagonist. Unfortunately, Casey's parents just miss her, and don't see or hear her as she tries to call for their help, and Wes Craven and Kevin Williamson show their appreciation for slashers, even as they plan to examine the tropes of them by paying homage to Psycho by having their big-name star be killed early on. And we get, honestly, one of the most disturbing deaths within this film, as she's left on a tree for her parents to find before the stinger plays and our cold open ends. Thus, we enter the next stage of this film, being something different for slasher fans. Scream is not just a slasher comedy. It is a whodunit. While the original Friday the 13th could also be considered a whodunit, the rest of the franchise we follow the killer and know their identity. The same is true with most other major slashers that were out at this point. Elm Street had Freddy, Halloween had Michael, Texas Chainsaw had Leatherface, Child's Play had Chucky, Leprechaun had the Leprechaun. Look, not all of them had full names, but most of these franchises were following the killer in each installment, who was the same person. This is something that Scream turns on the head of slashers by not only being a whodunit, but also having the killer different in each installment. With that, we finally meet our protagonist for the films we'll be talking about today, Sidney. And we get a scene that is meant to be viewed as romantic with Billy Loomis, Sidney's boyfriend, sneaking into her room via her window, which is a trope that, interestingly, Kevin Williamson will popularize with his TV show Dawson's Creek. The real thing to note about this scene, however, is we learn a few things immediately. Sidney's dad, Neil, is leaving town in the morning, which could give us some interesting clues for the whodunit later, though I suspect most of you watching this have already seen the first Scream film a few times. We also learn a little bit about the relationship between Billy and Sidney, which we'll absolutely have to come back to even deeper in part 2 of this series, but for now we learn that they've been together for 2 years, and originally we're starting to get sexually active, but Sidney became cold to the idea after her mom, Maureen, was raped and murdered a year ago. Something we'll learn about in the next scene. This begins one of the heavier topics that's scattered throughout Sidney's story, as even in this scene, Billy is using the idea of how movies would be edited for TV to pressure Sidney into changing her stance on going forward with him. While he's not being technically aggressive, he is attempting to manipulate her into feeling bad for him that he's been with her while she is going through her trauma from this event. While Billy claims that he is fine with not going all the way, yet he is still pressuring her into on the top of the clothes stuff, which is his way of slowly breaking her boundaries. A commonly used tactic for people who don't respect those boundaries to begin with. In fact, we then see him try to see if he can push that boundary further as he tries to lift Sidney's at nightgown, which she quickly rebuffs. Billy then tries to take it back in another attempt to keep the relationship so that he can make another push against Sidney's boundaries later, using the excuse that he was half joking. The next day, the media is abuzz outside Sidney's high school as the news is talking about Casey and Steven's deaths, and we meet the rest of our whodunit main cast and suspects. Starting immediately off with Tatum Riley, Sidney's best friend and school gossip, as she already has almost all the news about what happened, and it starts sharing it to Sidney, who immediately starts giving off some signs of discomfort to talk about, and we get our first hint about what happened to Sidney's mom, as the film has yet to actually state it. As Sidney sits in class waiting for the police to interrogate her as they go through all the students, we start to see some of the survivor's guilt that Sidney will develop even further as she looks at the empty seat where Casey would have been if she wasn't killed. Next up in our suspects list, though, we meet Principal Arthur Hembry, who appears to be a man who cares about his students, Sidney in particular, as everyone around her seems to almost treat her like glass due to the events before the film. The same is true of Deputy Dewey, Riley, Tatum's older brother, who is part of the investigation. We don't see the actual interrogation, but get an idea of how the adults treat Sidney before cutting away to the high school's courtyard and meet 2 more main cast suspects who also round out Sidney's friend group. Stu Macher, Tatum's boyfriend, and the class clown, who often says things without thinking, as he's the one to go into some details that start to make Sidney uncomfortable, which Billy manages to cut Stu off from continuing. We also meet Randy, the nerd and film buff of the group. Randy provides one of the key roles throughout the franchise of providing us with the so-called rules of surviving each film based on what type of slasher film we're dealing with. We'll go into that further as they're brought up. For this scene, though, we see that everyone kind of picks up on Sydney shutting down as she's likely imagining the trauma Casey went through as she's empathetic to the situation, though her friends might not recognize the full extent. Even Randy, who was willing to make jokes about how Casey was sliced and diced, is cautious to continue when Sydney asks how someone could gut a person. This is a question that's taken literally by the group, but from Sydney's emotional state, you can tell it is more of how can someone do something so cruel. It's then we get our first hint of a possible killer as Sydney calls out that Stu dated Casey, which is thrown away by Stu as being only a second. Randy then adds that Casey in fact had dumped him for Steve, which is news to Tatum as he told her he had dumped Casey for her. The next scene we get to hear this ethereal chorus for the first time that will follow Sydney throughout the film, and that I viewed as a representation of the depression that's directly connected to her mother's murder. It does end as she watches the news and is reminded over and over again of the tragedy that has occurred with her stopping the channel surfing on a particular reporter who connects this murder to the one of Sydney's mother, finally letting us, the audience, know what happened a year ago and why Sydney acts this way. As I noted earlier, Sydney has a visual tic that lets us know when she is uncomfortable, as she does it again here after turning off the TV. She will rub her neck as if she's trying to relieve the tension that is building up from the stress of a situation. Another clear sign of Sydney's depression from the film is her sleeping in the scene. Just as Sydney is waiting on Tatum to show up for a fun movie night, she finally gets her call from the killer, who tries to ask if she enjoys scary movies, but she just degrades them and finds them as mindless entertainment. We don't really ever find out if this was how she felt before a year ago, but I wouldn't doubt it's a part of why she wouldn't find them entertaining, as she would likely not wish to directly trigger her own trauma. Thinking it's just Randy teasing her, she's about to hang up when the killer threatens to do to her as was done to her mother. Unfortunately, she locks the door with the killer already in the house, and he goes swinging. One of the things you start to see with this scene is where in the cold open he had been almost like an actual ghost and almost smooth. Now we see that he's more human and clumsy, as he trips over himself and into doors as Sydney manages to outmaneuver him. This plays a part of undoing the supernatural element that a lot of slasher killers had when this movie came out, including the very element it introduced in the cold open. Once Sydney has outsmarted the killer with her door, Billy shows up in the window, but a cell phone drops out of his pocket, and in a time where not everyone had a cell phone. Sydney runs from Billy to the front door, where she is scared by Dewey holding the Ghostface mask before the cops take Billy in to be questioned as a suspect, and takes Sydney in for a statement and to contact her father. It's also here we meet the final main character fully, though she's been slowly sprinkled in the film, Gail Weathers, a local reporter who is known for having broken the story about Maureen's murder and claims that the man Sydney identified as the killer, Cotton Weary, is innocent. At the police station, Dewey tries to reach Sydney's dad, but we learn that he hasn't checked into the Hilton, putting him onto the suspect board. We also finally meet Billy's father, and the cops decide to hold him until they can look at the phone records. Gail shows up outside the station in an attempt to get an interview with Sydney, while inside Billy attempts to gain sympathy while being put into holding. The Ghostface costume turns out to be an extremely common costume, making it untraceable, and Billy's phone records will take the night to pull. So wanting to protect Sydney, who is currently reliving her worst nightmares as she has been to this police station before to report her mother's murder, is taken by Tatum and Dewey to their place, leaving the station through the back door to avoid the press. But Gail is waiting. Sydney confronts Gail with the fact that she wrote a book about her mother's murder, to which Gail is more than smug enough to offer to send a copy of, which puts Sydney, who is already going through so much within these past 24 hours, into fight mode, as she gives a hard right hook into Gail's face. All of Sydney's raw emotions of both what's been going on recently, on top of having to think about her mother's death again, is put into that swing. It's not just about the book and Gail's smug nature, it's also the fact that her boyfriend may not be who she thinks he is. The girls, well, mostly Tatum, enjoy that they're having a sleepover when there's a call for Sydney that turns out to be Ghostface. Well, looks like Billy might be in the clear since he's locked up. We also in that scene see that Sydney is still trying to process everything, and Tatum isn't really the best of friends, as when her mom asks how Sydney is doing, she just shrugs so nonchalantly, and that could be just Tatum being a teenager and not getting it, but also her supposed best friend is really hurting, and she just doesn't really seem to notice. something a lot of Sydney's friend group seems to not be great at responding to, which is unfortunately very true to a lot of people that go through what Sydney is facing. The next morning, the media is immediately talking about Sydney being attacked and relating it to her mother's murder, where we see Cotton Weary on the television for the first time, as he's making an appeal to escape the death penalty. We also learn that Billy's records were clean, so he's being released while the cops try to check every phone record in the state to cross-reference between Sydney and Casey, who could be making the calls. Another constant theme throughout the Scream franchise that is heavily pushed in the first entry is also this idea of the media and press and how they mass market tragedy and push it to the forefront of entertainment. Every time we see a television turned on in this first film, it is the news talking about the violence within the town of Woodsboro. We even see from the first high school scene that they aren't willing to let these kids just be kids, and are pushing cameras and mics in front of them from the start, even when it was only Casey and Steve who were killed and there was literally zero information beyond that murder. There is this strange disconnect between freedom of the press and the privacy of these teenagers. Sydney does agree to talk to Gail off the record, as she is starting to have doubts about if she was right that Cotton murdered her mother, and is trying to see if there's information Gail has that actually would prove this, as Ghostface seems to be connected to that night a year ago. We also learn that Cotton and Maureen possibly had an affair, as according to Cotton, he was drunk, they slept together, then he forgot his coat at the Prescott house when he left. Which is important, as Sydney used the fact that she saw someone leaving with that coat on as her testimony against Cotton. Gail figures out that Sydney might believe the Ghostface murders are connected to Maureen's murder, but Sydney and Tatum go into school before Gail can get any real answers. We see that Sydney, despite going through her own pain, feels bad about Billy and cares as she asks Stu where he is. Stu, of course, makes a crass remark about her branding Billy the Candyman. School as a whole is a madhouse, as some of the kids are running around in Ghostface costumes. Sydney goes into flight mode as once again her triggers are activated from this chaos when she runs into Billy. Billy tries to regain Sydney's trust, but she is still unsure, and he immediately catches that. He does also use this to once again be manipulative, as he claims she'd rather accuse him of being a psychopath than touch him. Once again, his actions appear to be rooted in forcing her to have sex with him. He then on top of that forces a trigger as he calls out that it was a year ago when her mom died, and that she stopped being herself then and telling her to just get over it. Clearly showing that he doesn't really care about her trauma, as he just wants to force her into being what he views as herself. To try to clear himself from what he's doing, he tries to connect her mom's death to his mom leaving his dad. Sydney sees through it, though, and calls out that her mom being murdered is different from his mom choosing to leave before she leaves him standing there and goes to the restroom. Meanwhile, Principal Hembry expels the students who were in Ghostface costumes after threatening them with scissors, showing a potentially more violent side to him. In the bathroom, we see how rumors in high school, even about someone's parents, can ripple and be harmful, as Sydney overhears a couple students mocking her, reminding us of the rumors that her mom was promiscuous and claiming Sydney was likely the same, and possibly Ghostface, as she wanted Steve and went crazy. We see as Sydney almost goes into a self-reflection. We also once more see her neck-rubbing tick during the scene as she gets angry, and you can tell she wants to attack like she did Gail. But she knows it won't do anything, as unfortunately you can't change the minds of people like that when it comes to rumors. After this moment, Sydney gets attacked in the bathroom by the real Ghostface, but once more we see how the film tries to show us that he's just a regular person with how clumsy he is and how easy it was for her to escape him. Because of this attack, school gets suspended until further notice, and Woodsboro calls for a curfew at 9 p.m. in order to keep everyone safe. As Dewey is heading into the high school to help get Sydney out, he meets Gail, who tries to flirt in an attempt to get information from him, which he does unintentionally give away some stuff the media didn't already know, even as he tries to play off flirting back, such as letting her know that Sydney's father is a possible suspect. Stu, of course, is excited about no school and sets up a house party with the group, which in theory would help people keep an eye on Sydney and avoid Ghostface attacking her again. Turns out, though, Sydney is not Ghostface's next target, as we see Principal Hembry, who at first thinks he's getting pranked, get murdered. We also get a fun little cameo from Wes Craven, dressed up like his other slasher, Freddy, while also being the school's janitor. Tatum and Sydney, meanwhile, are discussing that Cotton could have been telling the truth about Maureen's murder, which Sydney still doesn't want to believe because Cotton couldn't prove it in court, And also, part of her wants to be in denial of her mother having an affair, and the fact that she could have been wrong when she testified.
Well, I mean, you can only hear that Richard Gere gerbil story so many times before you have to start believing it.
We see that Ghostface was stalking them, which is interesting because Ghostface was just at the school. Guess we'll come back to that. At the video store that Randy works at, we start to get some of the more meta film commentary as Randy and Stu talk and see Billy over in the horror section, which Randy points out as a bad move when Billy's the main suspect. Randy then also points out the cops in the town are stupid and haven't watched enough movies to know some of the tricks seen in other slashers that would have let Billy get away with it. Also, that he has the most motive as the boyfriend. Randy also reveals his crush on Sydney for the first time, while Stu laughs at the idea of them getting together.
No.
Stu thinks it's her dad who is still missing, but Randy claims the cops can't find him because he's dead already. Randy gets a bit worked up and says everyone is a suspect, which gets everyone in the store looking.
If they'd watch prom night, they'd save time. There's a formula to it. A very simple formula. Everybody's a suspect.
Billy then sneaks up on Randy and suggests Randy could be the killer, to which Randy immediately agrees that he could be, and when asked what his motive would be, he says he doesn't need one, because it's the millennium. As everyone starts to head inside for the curfew, and Dewey drives Tatum and Sydney to the police station as they prepare to head to the party, we hear what I would argue as the unofficial theme for the initial Scream films, Red Right Hand by Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, which I could almost give a separate video on, as it also deals with a lot of similar ideas, delving into stuff from Paradise Lost, and the idea of this shadowy figure, so very fitting for this franchise. The girls get stuff for the party while talking about possibly having their story turned into a movie, and more importantly, how Sydney and Billy's relationship is going. Tatum makes it clear she's on Sydney's side and understands why she's unable to perform with Billy, and that he doesn't deserve her. One of the few times we see Tatum being a pretty good friend in this film and understanding of Sydney's trauma. We also still see Ghostface following them with a more subtle mirror shot in the freezer section of the store. Dewey, meanwhile, talks to the sheriff to report in, and we find out the phone calls were from Sydney's dad, and the motive seems clear with the next day being the anniversary of Maureen's murder. They agree to try and find Neil first and keep an eye on Sydney in the meantime. Everyone makes it to the party, including Gail, who follows Dewey and the girls, but is immediately spotted by him. We have officially entered the famous 42-minute end sequence for this movie, also known as Scene 118. While doing research for this video, so much behind-the-scenes craziness happened to make this sequence possible that the crew who were there for it have "I Survived Scene 118" shirts. And honestly, it was not in vain. This sequence is amazing. And if you've never seen the first Scream, I know I've been spoiling a lot already, but stop the video now. Go watch the movie. Be amazed by this sequence. Then come back and we can examine it together. Dewey and Gail go inside to check on the kids, with Gail also secretly planting a live camera into the living room as everyone decides on a horror movie to watch, with Sydney being uninterested. Stu has Tatum go grab more beers from the garage. Sydney tries to figure out if her father's been found yet, to which Dewey disappoints her by letting her know that there's been no sign yet. Tatum enters the garage where Ghostface appears. She thinks it's just Randy pranking her until he cuts her arm.
Oh, you want to play psycho killer? Can I be the helpless victim? Okay, let's see. No, please don't kill me, Mr. Ghostface. I want to be in the sequel.
And we get one of the more extreme murders after the cold open one. Tatum attempts to escape, managing to knock some of the beer bottles into Ghostface, but fails to run through the pet door in the garage as she gets stuck, and Ghostface slides the door open, decapitating her. Ghostface then enters the party as a lot of people are leaving, except Billy, who finally arrives so that he can try to reconcile with Sydney. Stu encourages it, and a little more, by offering his parents' room. They agree to talk, much to Randy's disappointment. Back in the van, Gail and her cameraman learn the live feed is on a 30-second delay. Sydney and Billy make amends as Sydney comes to terms with her mom having had an affair with Cotton, and probably others. The two then have sex at Sydney's prompting, and honestly one of the few times Billy wasn't being forceful, so true consent finally? We then cut back to the boys in the living room with some of the girls watching Halloween, and we get the big rule scene finally as Randy explains how horror films work.
There are certain rules that one must abide by in order to successfully survive a horror movie. For instance, number 1, You can never have sex. No. Big no-no. Big no.
I'm a dead man.
Leave him in popcorn. Sex equals death, okay? Number 2, you can never drink or do drugs. No, the sin factor. It's a sin. It's an extension of number 1. And number 3, never, ever, ever, under any circumstances say, I'll be right back. Because you won't be back.
I'm getting another beer. You want one?
Yeah, sure.
I'll be right back.
You see, you push the laws and you end up dead. Okay, I'll see you in the kitchen with a knife.
Outside, Dewey and Gale get distracted as they go to investigate a car found in the woods that the sheriff told Dewey to check out. The party, except our main characters, leave after Randy gets a call that Principal Hembry has been murdered and hung out by the football field as the partygoers want to go see, and we learn the real reason Hembry was killed is to distract the partiers and leave our main cast alone with Ghostface. Dewey and Gale flirt and connect with each other as they stroll towards the car, almost getting hit by the teens heading to the school. We get a little bit of a moment and kiss when the two tumble into the bushes to avoid being hit. Then they find the car, which turns out to be Neil's, but it's empty, sending them back to the house. After sex, Sidney starts to notice some clues, such as the ringer in the bedroom phone being off, and questions Billy on who he called with his one phone call from jail. He says his dad, but Sidney saw the sheriff call his dad. This upsets Billy that even after having sex, she doesn't trust him. Just as they're about to confront each other, Ghostface comes in and stabs Billy. Ghostface chases Sidney around the house, this time actually able to cut her off at points, as if he knows the house better than her, but still being slammed into doors and shown that he's merely human. Sidney runs onto the roof and falls off in front of the garage to finally see what happened to Tatum. Ghostface decides to go after Randy, who is calling out for Jamie to look behind her in Halloween. Ironic with Randy being played by Jamie Kennedy, also needing to look behind him. Randy gets lucky though, as Sidney outside is yelling for help and causes Ghostface to go after her. She manages to get the help from the cameraman, but they realize Ghostface is already outside too late because of the 30-second delay, getting the cameraman killed. Sidney once more barely escapes, running into the nearby fields as Dewey and Gale make it back to the house. Dewey goes inside to confront Ghostface while Gale is to call the sheriff. Once more, on top of how tense the action feels, the stings of music add to the tension in this scene. Gale finds Kenny, the cameraman's blood and Cheetos, but no Kenny. She attempts to drive off after failing to call the police, but she's scared by Randy, slamming the phone in his face, when Kenny's body falls off the car. She almost runs over Sidney, but crashes the van down a hill and into a tree. The tension still rises as Sidney goes back to the house for Dewey, who has been stabbed in the back. Ghostface chases her next into the police car, but he's got the keys. He distracts her by unlocking the side doors, but slowly sneaks in from the trunk. She manages to call the police, but is nearly snatched by Ghostface. Sidney has gone into full fight mode as she takes Dewey's gun and aims at both Randy and Stu, who claim the other is Ghostface. She locks them both out of the house to deal with each other, where she finds Billy is still alive. She gives him the gun, only for him to finally reveal the twist, that he is Ghostface, shooting Randy when he enters the house and says, "Stu's gone mad." Billy then quotes Psycho.
We all go a little mad sometimes.
Turns out, Billy and Stu are Ghostface together and use corn syrup to fake Billy's stabbing. While claiming to not have a motive, Billy reveals it's all because her mom slept with his dad and is why his mom left. They also revealed they killed her mom and framed Cotton. Stu's motive is just being crazy and willing to do whatever Billy says. Their plan now is to kill everyone, frame Sidney's dad, who they had kidnapped, with his motive being the death of Maureen, and leave them the surviving two of the attacks. They begin stabbing each other after explaining all of this, with Billy getting a little too stab happy and overdoing it to Stu after he goes a little too deep in a stab to Billy. While scene 118 as a whole is pretty famous, the kitchen scene that we're now in is probably the most famous part of it, with everyone praising Matthew Lillard's memeability as Stu. Though I think everybody in the scene really shows how talented they are, and there's a reason this scene is in the zeitgeist of film, even if you've never watched Scream. Billy, Stu, and Sidney also make some commentary about how movies aren't the cause of violence, but they do make creativity for the violence. Which personally I think is kind of true. The point being that people that will enact violence were likely to already do that with or without media. As Stu is feeling woozy, Billy tells him to go get the gun so they can have Sidney's father kill himself. But the gun is missing. Turns out, while they were monologuing,
You sly dog! You got me monologuing!
Gale picked it up. She aims it at them. Unfortunately, Billy knows the safety is on and manages to knock her out. As she cracks his neck and is about to kill her, Stu notices Sydney and her dad are missing now. It really is just the chaotic energy of this scene that makes it so amazing. Everything that could go wrong for the killers, it's just as they were ready to enact the finale perfectly. They get a call, and it's Sydney using the voice changer to mess with them after calling the police. Stu is slowly dying from the stab wounds and cries his innocence as just someone who fell into peer pressure to Sydney. Honestly, the funniest bits, which were improvised by Matthew Lillard, are the phone call parts.
What's your motive? Billy's got one. The police are on their way. What are you gonna tell them?
Peer pressure. I'm far too sensitive. Did you really call the police?
You missed your sorry ass.
My mom and dad are gonna be so mad.
Billy, in a rage, tracks Sydney in the coat closet as she's dressed up in the Ghostface outfit and stabs him with an umbrella. Stu then chases her in a fight that ends with her dropping the fat TV on his head, crushing and electrifying him. Sorry to all the Stu is Alive fans out there. I can't ascribe to that belief. The television was a heavy mother. He gets electrified in the face, and he was already bleeding out and dying before all that. It's a fun theory, but I can't believe in it personally. Turns out, Randy has survived so far, as Billy shows up to try and finally kill Sydney, but she manages to distract him with the umbrella injury long enough for Gail to come in and shoot him properly this time. With Randy, Sydney, and Gail having survived, Randy warns of the killer's final return in slashers.
Careful. This is the moment when the supposedly dead killer comes back to life for one last scare.
Just in time for Billy to pop up and be shot in the forehead by Sydney. Sydney and Randy untie Neil as the cops arrive, and we learn that Dewey survived his wound, but is being taken to the hospital. Gail reports everything that happened in the final shot as we see the Stu Macher house one more time. That's Scream 1! While we get a lot of movie trope discussion, which as a film lover I do enjoy about the franchise, I also think both Kevin Williamson and Wes Craven wanted to deal with some deeper issues of depression, PTSD, and guilt. I think how they handled Sydney in this film was solid groundwork for what we'll be continuing to discuss in this video. With that, let's jump to a year later. We immediately begin the film with commentary on the media and how they will capitalize on true crime, as the events of Scream 1 have been turned into the film Stab, based on a book from Gail Weathers. We get the return of Red Right Hand immediately here as the movie starts with Maureen Evans and Phil Stevens watching the film's version of Casey's death, and some meta-commentary about race in horror films, as well as the sexualization of women. Something the first film also talked about. We also get a little bit of the violence in theaters that wasn't quite a major topic yet, as Phil is killed in the bathroom and then Maureen is killed in front of everyone as the killer tricks her into thinking it's Phil, while the audience thinks it's a publicity stunt. After the cold open, we join Sydney at her dorm in Windsor College, Ohio, where she is being harassed by people who have seen the movie as they try to use the Ghostface voice changer to prank call her, but Sydney has learned to respond to this type of behavior, with her immediately able to scare these punks off. While we definitely see Sydney overcome her trauma regarding her mother for the most part in the first film, much like real trauma, we'll see that it's not fully gone. We also immediately meet Sydney's roommate and new friend Hallie as they watch Cotton being interviewed on the TV now that he's been exonerated, something that immediately triggers Sydney once more, along with the increase in prank calls and seeing on the news that Phil and Maureen were murdered. Recognizing the sign, Sydney goes to find Randy, who is in his film studies class. The media, like last time, is already abuzz and have tracked down Sydney to harass her and see if she knows anything about these new murders. In Randy's film class, we get the conversation of real-life violence's connection to the media again as we meet Cece and Mickey. We also get an appearance from Joshua Jackson before he would become Pacey in Kevin Williamson's show Dawson's Creek. In this conversation, we eventually get to the real film meta-narrative of sequels, and more specifically horror sequels, and how they tend to not be as good as the original and highly derivative. Randy's line in particular about the horror genre being destroyed by sequels definitely goes into what we discussed with the history of how the original Scream even came to be what it is. As Sydney is trying to convince Randy that it's connected to them, we meet Sydney's new boyfriend Derek. We clearly see Randy still jealous of Sydney being with someone that's not him, but he sticks around. Gail shows up on the college's campus with her new cameraman, Joel, as the true media circus begins. Even Gail isn't safe from it, as a reporter named Debbie Salt tries to get answers from her on the connection between the movie, her book, and the murders. Gail is able to sharply cut her off and ignore the other reporters. Just like in the first film, the police continue to be incompetent, as the cops don't think there's going to be more killings and view it as an isolated incident with no precautionary plans in the works. Horror often shows how the police and authority figures in general can be incompetent when it comes to real threats, and Scream as a franchise is not very different in that view of authority. As our main cast watches over the press briefing, we meet the Delta Lambda sorority sisters who have Haley as a pledge and want Sydney to join as well and make sure she's invited to the party. We then find Dewey as we get the introduction to what will be used as Dewey's theme for the rest of the series. We learn Sydney is also the lead in the school's play. Dewey is there because he agrees with Sydney that the movie theater murders are connected to them and to warn her that most likely the threat will come from one of her friends. We never really see Dewey talk about Tatum after the first film, so I want to kind of speculate that the reason he becomes so protective of Sydney is that she's his last connection to Tatum. As she half-jokingly says,
He's worried our surrogate big brother.
While this is played to be half serious, I think it really is true that Dewey sees her as a little sister now that his biological little sister is dead. We see with the core three of Dewey, Randy, and Sydney a form of trauma bonding. While Gail also has the trauma from that night at the Mocker house, she seems to weaponize it into a way to profit, while the others are still trying to process it. Randy goes off to find and catch up with Dewey when Gail tries to surprise Sydney with an interview with Cotton. Sydney doesn't have the same sort of tic that she had in high school, but we do see that she visibly gets exhausted and triggered at this when she gives a big sigh before going into fight mode and slapping Gail across the face. Cotton is just as surprised as Sydney, as he thought it would be an official reunion with Sydney. Gail runs into Dewey, who is mad at her for bothering Sydney, as well as how Gail presented him in her book as a Barney Fife-type officer. After a brief argument, Dewey can't help but still compliment her, showing he still cares for her despite being upset. Sydney does join Haley at her sorority's party, where we see Sydney is caught off guard by how welcoming they are, and has her guards put up, not ready to trust anyone. Meanwhile, Cece is back at her sorority's house, wherein she gets the standard Ghostface call that starts off flirting but turns hostile. As she tries to call for help, we get a jump scare from one of the sisters, leaving as Ghostface sneaks his way in. The tension rises as she sets the alarm, but he's in the house. Ghostface calls one more time before striking and chasing her throughout the sorority house. Once more, like the original killers, we can see that he's very much human, tripping and having things thrown at him before he eventually chases her through the second floor's balcony door, setting off the alarm, stabbing her in the back, and throwing her off the balcony. Back at the party, everyone has shown up, and the sisters are trying to convince Sydney to pledge with them, mentioning Derek is in their brother fraternity. The party is ruined, though, as police show up to Cece's murder. Gail shows up last to the scene with Joel as Debbie Salt leaves already having the story ready. Dewey digs into Gail more when he also arrives on the scene. Sydney goes back into the party house to get her jacket when the phone rings, and it's Ghostface, and he immediately attacks. Derek attempts to get into the locked house while Ghostface does his usual tripping over things. Eventually, Sydney reaches the backyard where Derek and Dewey run in. Dewey finds the injured Derek, who has had his arm cut, but no sign of Ghostface, with the front door already open and confused sorority sister standing there. This immediately triggers Sydney fully and brings her into a rage. We get that musical cue I mentioned in the first film when Sydney is going through her triggers before switching scenes to Derek in the hospital. I think a lot of the ideas of what Dewey was talking about are in her mind as she considers needing to push people away. Once more, a common thing for hurt people to do as a defense mechanism. In Sydney's case, it is both to protect others and herself, but sometimes it can be used purely to protect the hurt person. At the hospital, Mickey and Haley try to comfort Sydney while the police and Dewey grill Derek because they find it interesting that the cut just missed his nerves and that Ghostface got away. Derek returns the suspicion onto Dewey since he showed up just as Ghostface disappeared. Back at the station, the police, Gail, and Dewey figure out that the new Ghostface is patterning his attacks on Billy and Stu's, as Cece's full name is Casey, with Maureen Evans being Maureen Prescott, Phil Stevens being Stephen North, and Cece Cooper being Casey Becker. All this means Sydney is definitely the target again. The police have placed security on her, and Sydney tells Derek she needs space from him for his own protection. Derek sees through it as not just that, but also that Sydney doesn't fully trust him. After Dewey leaves to go keep an eye on Sydney, Gail gets harassed by Debbie Salt and the other reporters, and they suggest Dewey is suspicious, to which Gail defends him as a good guy, showing she does truly care about him. During lunch, Derek decides to prove his love and devotion to Sydney by singing I Think I Love You by the Partridge Family as an homage to Tom Cruise singing Lost That Lovin' Feelin' by the Righteous Brothers and Top Gun in front of the entire cafeteria. He then presents her his Greek letters as a necklace. Dewey and Randy finally catch up as they watch a promo for the Stab movie, which has Tori Spelling playing herself playing Sydney, which Sydney predicted in the first movie. We also learned David Schwimmer played Dewey, and in the promo we see Luke Wilson play Billy. Fun little things here keep you sucked in even as all the serious drama plays out. After the promo, we get Randy giving us the rules for a horror sequel.
The way I see it, someone's out to make a sequel. You know, cash in on all the movie murder hoopla. So it's our job to observe the rules of the sequel. Number 1, the body count is always bigger. Number 2, the death scenes are always much more elaborate. More blood, more gore. Carnage, candy. Your core audience just expects it. And number 3, if you want your sequel to become a franchise, never, ever...
How do we find the killer, Randy? That's what I want to know.
So far, they are Derek the boyfriend, Mickey the weird film student, which also puts Randy on the list. If Randy's on the list, then so is Dewey. We also have Haley and Gail, so as usual, nobody is ruled out. We also learned that the stab wound in Dewey's back severed a nerve and gave him a limp. Cameraman Joel finally read Gail's book and wants out after learning what happened to Kenny, but for now is convinced to stay. We see Sydney trying to pull out of her play as it hits too close for her with her playing the tragic Greek character Cassandra, but the director convinces her to stay in knowing she's a fighter. This doesn't last though, as during a run of a scene, Sydney's triggers are set off and she believes she saw Ghostface among the masked actors. This is the first time in the series that it could be questioned whether it was in Sydney's head or not, but it won't be the last. She runs backstage to find Derek, who is supposedly there to take his turn to keep watch over her, Mickey apparently swapping his turn so he could edit. Sydney turns him away again as she thinks he could have been the Ghostface she just saw. Meanwhile, Randy, Dewey, and Gail are trying to figure out Ghostface's plan in the school squad as Joel freaks out and leaves them alone so he can calm down when they get a call from Ghostface. Randy tries to distract him while the others run around the quad to see if they can find out who is on the phone with them at the same time. After Randy insults Billy and Stu, he gets grabbed and murdered in Joel's news van. Joel comes back with his donuts and the crew find Randy dead. Sydney is at the library when she gets a threatening instant message, and her security try to see who in the library sent it when Cotton confronts her. He wants to get the two of them on Diane Sawyer and make money, but it can only be with both of them. This shows once more the idea of media and its connection to true crime and how it's glorified on television. Sydney turns him down though, as she wants to just live her life, which angers Cotton, who still blames her for ruining his life. He starts to yell at her, which gets the cops on him. They interrogate him, but have nothing on him. Sydney learns about Randy's death while at the police station. She out loud voices annoyance about Dewey treating her like breakable glass and that she won't break, to which Hallie says,
"It's okay to break."
This might be our first look at a friend in Sydney's circle being there for her on the emotional and trauma level. Understanding that it's okay to have your moments of breaking down, but Sydney still has all of these guards up that won't let her. While Dewey's on the cautious side of let's not break her, Hallie is just there whether she breaks or holds it, but also makes it clear that breaking is not bad. Sometimes people need to be reminded of that, but Sydney doubles down. Cops let Cotton go and set up a campus lock-in as they offer to take Sydney and Hallie back to their dorm. The media immediately swarm Cotton, who is living for the limelight, while Gail lashes out at Debbie Salt and has Joel quit on her after having his van turned into a crime scene. Gail finally breaks down and tells Dewey she feels bad about everything and wants to just find Ghostface, so they team up with the idea of using the footage Joel shot to find Ghostface in the crowds of each crime scene using the college's VCRs. Once more, we get the Dewey music cue, which kind of becomes Gail and Dewey's love theme as they watch back on the tapes and see themselves fighting while also falling for each other. As things get heated, the TV VCR clicks showing footage from the night Maureen and Phil died at the theater, then shows the night Cece died, then Randy's death. It seems Ghostface has edited the footage. Then it cuts to a live feed of them. Dewey notices where Ghostface is hiding and gives chase, but by the time he gets there, Ghostface is gone, but it appears behind Gail. Gail ends up in a soundproof sound mixing area, and Dewey is stabbed in the back again, while failing to get Gail's attention through the soundproof window. He's able to get her attention with the mic too late though. Realizing he can't get to Gail, Ghostface leaves. Derek watches as Haley and Sydney enter the police escort, promising Sydney to still be there when it's all over, but he's kidnapped by his frat brothers for giving up his Greek letters so he can be punished. They tie him up to the set for the play in just his boxers and party around him. As the cop escorts are at a stoplight, Ghostface smashes through a window and slashes the driver's neck. Hallie and Sydney are helplessly locked in the back as Ghostface runs over the other cop but doesn't actually kill him until crashing the car into a construction zone and some pipes. The girls have to sneak out of the car while Ghostface is unconscious. With the high tension, they manage to escape by crawling over him through the driver's side window. Sidney, done with running, decides to go back to unmask Ghostface and face him, but he's already gone, and he kills Haley. The fact that you're practically holding your breath as you expect Ghostface to wake up and slash them in the car, but he doesn't, gives you a sigh of relief, only for him to then show up behind Hallie. The talent behind Scream continues to show they understand horror, tension, and fear. As Gail tries to finally make her escape, she runs into a bloodied Cotton who claims he found Dewey, but Gail manages to call campus police using Debbie's phone. We reach the film's climax as Sidney arrives at the campus theater, haunting music playing, and her searching for anyone to help. The music cuts and a spotlight is placed on her. Scenery drop behind her, trapping her. While Sidney should be rightfully scared, the look we have on her face instead is one of determination. She's done running, and it's time to once more face her trauma as Derek is dropped behind her, exhausted and still tied up to the set. Ghostface shows up as she starts to untie Derek and weaponizes her trust issues as he reveals himself to be Mickey and claims that Derek is the other Ghostface, history repeating itself. Sidney seems to believe Mickey as she can't seem to come to the aid of Derek until it's too late when Mickey shoots him in the chest, killing him near instantly. Derek's last words will leave a huge impact on Sidney going forward.
I never would have hurt you. Never.
I think this is a massive point in Sidney's journey of trauma, as her lack of trust in people is what at least seemingly has gotten Derek killed, and maybe in Sidney's mind, even all of the other victims to Ghostface. Sidney's blaming herself for the crimes of Ghostface is a common element going forward, and is something that people who have experienced this kind of trauma tend to do as part of their survivor's guilt. Mickey then tries to guilt her more as he reveals his plan. Once more, this tracks as part of the commentary on media sensationalism of true crime, especially murder, with the O.J. Simpson trial still very relevant when Scream 2 came out, and Mickey wanting a similar spectacle. He will also use the fact that the religious groups will likely be willing to pay for his trial, as he's going to claim the movies made him do it. A plea that at this time would potentially actually nearly exonerate him of any wrongdoing in the court of public opinion, at least. The symbolism of these themes happening in a theater is subtly slammed home, with Mickey saying,
It's like theater, they're dying for it.
Much like Billy and Stu, Mickey finds himself monologuing.
You sly dog! You got me monologuing!
And Sidney uses that as a chance to attack him with Derek's Greek letters, slashing his face a bit before forcing him to drop his gun. They get into a quick back and forth before Mickey regains the upper hand with his gun, and Derek's body is raised away by the mysterious second Ghostface, who finally reveals themselves. It's Debbie Salt pointing a gun at Gail, who turns out to actually be Mrs. Loomis, Billy's mother. Gail didn't recognize her because she had lost 60 pounds and done a lot of makeover work. Turns out they met online, and Mrs. Loomis paid for Mickey to get into Windsor College so they could enact their plan. It's then we get another reveal from Mrs. Loomis as she shoots and kills Mickey because her motivation is pure revenge and she doesn't want to get caught. Before Gail can get Mickey's gun, he manages to fire a loose shot while dying that knocks Gail off the stage and into the music pit. Mrs. Loomis's plan is to frame Mickey and have it be that Mickey and Sidney killed each other. As Mrs. Loomis gets enraged by Sidney insulting Billy and her parenting of him, we get confirmation that she killed Randy for doing the same thing. One of the few times in Scream we get confirmation of which Ghostface did which killing, as most of the time it's up to fans' speculation. Sidney, quick on her feet, distracts Mrs. Loomis by claiming Mickey is still alive before making an escape behind the drop theater sets. Sidney manages to get a fire axe and starts dropping lights and other parts of the set onto Mrs. Loomis, who begins to panic around the stage to avoid getting crushed. Sidney once more has gone full fight mode with her survival instincts, and Mrs. Loomis chose the worst place to have this fight, as Sidney knows it better than her. Finally, Mrs. Loomis gets knocked down by part of the set, and Sidney goes to check things out, ready for more of a fight, which Mrs. Loomis does bring it when she attacks with the Ghostface knife. Just as she's about to bring the killing stab, Cotton appears with one of the guns. Mrs. Loomis tries to convince Cotton to let her kill Sidney so he can receive fame, but Cotton manages to coerce Sidney into the Diane Sawyer interview and kills Mrs. Loomis in return. Sidney takes the gun from Cotton as Gail comes up from the pit, still alive. Sidney gives Gail the other gun and waits for Mrs. Loomis to come back for one last scare, but it's actually Mickey who they both shoot a bunch, and just to be safe, Sidney headshots Mrs. Loomis. We end again with the EMS and police on the scene, and Joel back and ready to report with Gail. We once more learn that Dewey survived a stab in the back and is on his way to the hospital as the knife only hit his old scar tissues. Gail hops into the ambulance to be with Dewey rather than be an opportunist and try to scoop the story. Sidney gets surrounded by the reporters again, but uses Cotton's ambition as an opportunity to make him the hero and get out of the limelight while giving him exactly what he wants. The final shot we have is Sidney going off on her own as we get a far shot of the campus, and that's Scream 2. Interesting at them ending with Sidney moving on alone, which makes a lot of sense with where her journey goes next. Speaking of, we are now in probably the most controversial of the original 4 films, which, funnily, is also my favorite. We return to California, this time in Hollywood, as we follow Cotton, who is in Stab 3 as a cameo. He gets a call from an unknown number, which at this point we should know how this goes, with it turning out to be Ghostface, who threatens his girlfriend Christine if Cotton refuses to tell him where Sidney is. Cotton chooses to race to his place, only for Christine believing he was attacking her, as Ghostface had used his voice changer to sound like Cotton beneath the costume. This is an interesting twist with the Scream and Ghostface formula, as usually the voice changer is just used to hide the identity of Ghostface, but here, it's used to manipulate the victim, which is a key tool for this particular iteration of Ghostface and how he relates to Sidney. Because of this gaslighting by Ghostface, Christine attacks Cotton until Ghostface reveals himself and kills them both. After the title, we cut to Sidney, who is now living alone with her dog Cherokee in heavy isolation and security, locking both her outside gate with a security code, but also her house and the door having 3 locks, a big theme for how Sidney is now living her life in the self-isolation and disconnect from the outside world after the events of Scream 2. Throughout the scene, we get that haunting music cue that belongs to Sidney by this point in the series. She also seems to be trying to use her trauma as a way to help others, as she now works for the California Women's Crisis Counseling. We then see Gail giving a seminar on reporting to college students, and she seems to be back to her cutthroat ways when LAPD Detective Mark Kincaid, played by the famous McDreamy from Grey's Anatomy, so excuse me if I call him Detective McDreamy, introduces himself to Gail and wants to question her about Cotton and Christine's murders. It turns out a picture of a young Maureen Prescott was left with the bodies by Ghostface. Sidney learns about the murders on the news, and we see she immediately begins to relive everything from the past 2 movies in 1 second. We get our Red Right Hand music cue as we join the Stab 3 movie set that is being swarmed by police and media because of the murders. The director Roman Bridger is fighting to keep his movie alongside the producer John Milton, played by alien icon Lance Henriksen, known for playing Bishop in that series. I haven't really been making as many callouts like this for actors until now, as part of why Scream 3 is my favorite, is a lot of respect that it shows for some of the old guard of horror with its casting, as well as sort of getting insight into filmmaking as a whole. John Milton and Roman are having to fight off the idea that movies are causing murders, as seems to be a continuing theme in the series. But also, the actors for Stab 3 are starting to get concerned if they could be next. We see Tyson Fox, who is playing Ricky, a Randy substitute after Randy's character was killed off in Stab 2, who thinks it might have been an obsessed fan of the Stab films. Tom Prince, someone I think is an obvious stand-in for Freddie Prinze Jr. as the Scream 1 and 2 writer, worked with him on the classic slasher film I Know What You Did Last Summer, who is playing the fictionalized version of Dewey after David Schwimmer didn't come back. Angelina Taylor is Tori Spelling's replacement to play Sidney after a long and large casting search for the perfect person to play the role, but she seems to doubt the idea of still being on set. For now, the last person we meet is Sarah Darling, who plays Candy, the girl who dies early on in Stab 3. Gail arrives at the set with a hidden camera and meets her double for the Stab franchise, Jennifer Jolie, an obvious Angelina Jolie stand-in, and her bodyguard Steven Stone, played by the always awesome Patrick Warburton. I just wanted to point out Patrick Warburton because he's cool. Gail is unimpressed with her and upset to find that Dewey is there serving as a technical advisor to help keep the accuracy of the real people involved. Dewey already knows about Maureen's pictures being found at the murders, but is keeping the information from Sidney in order to protect her and prevent her from leaving where she's hiding. Gail is kicked off set by Milton for being news press as she yells she's supposed to be there helping Detective McDreamy. Sidney is joined by her dad as they discuss their part in everything, how her mother kept so many secrets, and how she needs to come home. Sidney refuses to return home, though, as she wishes to stay safe still from whoever the next Ghostface may be. Scream 3 then throws us into another first, a full-on dream sequence in which Sidney's mother stands by the window and calls out to her and blames her for the deaths around her. Then Ghostface attacks before she wakes up. The next day, Sarah Darling arrives in Roman's office to go over new lines as the script keeps changing on the fly. But it turns out Ghostface used his voice changer again to pretend to be Roman before chasing her around the studio lot and killing her, but not before she could accidentally pop off the head of one of Roman's music video awards. I also love how they utilize the fact that they're on a movie set for films based on the Ghostface killings to add to the tension with Sarah running into a room filled with Ghostface costumes and one of them being actually him, or her trying to use the prop weapons that are just plastic to defend herself in vain. We then have Dewey and Gale catching up, and we learn that they separated because Gale was going to be the host of 60 Minutes 2, which failed, while Dewey wanted to stay in Woodsboro. Dewey also reveals to Gale that he's known that someone's been trying to track Sidney down, even breaking into the police records, but Dewey already removed Sidney's files. Dewey gets called in to check in on Jennifer at her house, where he and Gale learn about Sarah's murder. Dewey and Jennifer realize the murders are happening in the order of the Stab 3 script, with Jennifer Gale being the next target. We also learn that Dewey has been living in an RV outside Jennifer's house with a possible romantic relationship between the two. Detective McDreamy and his partner find another Maureen photo next to the body, and we learn that he's a bit of a film buff. We also learn the big catch is there are multiple versions of the script, with each one having a different order and a different killer reveal to avoid internet leaks. Even in the 2000s, fandom was ruining their franchises. Roman is freaking out as the film is shut down, as this was the movie the studio was forcing him to make his passion project, and he thinks he's the next target after finding the broken music video award. Because Ghostface used Roman's voice to lure Sarah, he is taken in by LAPD for questioning, and McDreamy borrows Dewey's cell phone since his is low on battery. We then return to Sidney, who gets a call from Ghostface, who seems to have tracked her down finally, and uses the voice changer to sound like Maureen to taunt her more. Ghostface also tries to make Sidney feel guilty by making her see the news of Sarah's murder. Meanwhile, back at Jennifer's place, the cast and Dewey are having a pity party with Tom ripping the script over the shutdown of Stab 3. Gale tries to snoop when she overhears Dewey and Jennifer talking about her, where he hints that he still loves her, but tries to cover it with insults. We get the Dewey and Gale guitar riff music cue during this. Stone busts Gale and brings her inside. We learn from Gale that the cops let Roman go as his cell phone had been cloned and that there is no information about Maureen in her 20s, which is how old she is in the photos that Ghostface has been leaving behind, as she had disappeared from Woodsboro before returning and getting with Neil. Dewey then realizes that the photos aren't just any normal photo, but headshots taken at the same studio that Stab 3 is being filmed, as Jennifer has a similar photo with one of the same buildings in the background. As Dewey tries to investigate further, Ghostface attacks and kills Stone, who is nosing around Dewey's RV. He lives long enough to walk to the front door and drop dead in front of everyone in the house. See you in Emperor's New Groove, Patrick Warburton. Ghostface turns out the lights and sends a fax of the movie script telling them who is next to die. Dewey and Gale convince most of them to run outside, but Tom goes back in to read the script because there's no light, though he has to use a lighter to read the last lines that reveal the gas line to the house has been leaking, blowing up the house and killing Tom. The survivors jump off the pool backyard balcony and get separated. Dewey is forced to make a choice between Gale and Jennifer, choosing Gale, just in time to save her from Ghostface by shooting him. Surprisingly, Dewey makes every shot in the body mass of Ghostface, something that if you've paid attention to the franchise so far, they would have let a Ghostface die from that, but this one seems to have survived it as he rolls under a car and disappears. We'll come back to that. However, in the moment, Jennifer rolls up pissed at Dewey because after everything she gave him, he chose Gale. She slaps him, only for Gale to finally be the one to deliver a punch as she knocks Jennifer to the ground. Angelina finally shows up scarred from Tom's death as they find another Maureen picture, this time with the note, "I killed her," on the back, complicating things when Gale and Dewey bring it back to Detective Kincaid. Kincaid is frustrated as he now thinks there might have been a third killer of Maureen and behind the events of Scream 1, and believes that only Sidney could know the truth. He wants her brought in, but Dewey is still not telling. Just as Dewey caves and calls her, Sidney finally shows up to the police station, and she's ready to face Ghostface head-on with her friends rather than alone. They figure out that the way that Ghostface was able to finally track her number was from a scanner on the film set that pulled her number from Dewey's cell phone. When Sidney learns about the photo, she is a little upset about Dewey not telling her and has Kincaid take her to the set. Since Randy is dead, on the movie set we meet his sister Martha, who has a pre-made tape Randy set up in case he died during Scream 2, which he did. In it, we get the rules for a slasher trilogy. They're about learning something about the beginning. Rules are that the killer is superhuman, explaining how Ghostface was able to be shot earlier and survive. Anyone, including the main character, can die, and the past will come back to bite you. Gale splits from the group to go investigate where the pictures have been coming from when she runs into Jennifer, and they team up despite Gale not wanting to since she has a keycard to the studio's archives. There they find Bianca Burnett, played by the great Carrie Fisher, and including a joke that Bianca looks like her and was passed up for the role of Princess Leia because Carrie slept with George Lucas. They manage to bribe Bianca into pulling the files for Rena Reynolds, Maureen's stage name, revealing that she was in John Milton's horror films when he was a director. While Sydney is alone, we get to see that the pressure and signs of her PTSD are still there as she begins to shake before believing that Ghostface is in the bathroom with her. Instead, she finds Angelina trying to take the movie's Ghostface costume as a souvenir from the set, as this was her only chance to make the big shots. When Sydney chases after Angelina to comfort her, she finds the set of her house and the Stu Macher house, with Sydney's haunting music cue playing over the scene as a sign that this is still fully haunting for Sydney the character. She explores the sets and finds them to be almost exactly like the real things, even having some reminders of her and Billy's relationship. When she hears movement, she uses her knowledge of the set as her home to set up the door trick again, and has Mace at the ready. However, Ghostface grabs her from the window, and she has to fight him off while yelling for help from Dewey and running into the Macher film set. It seems that Dewey has become a safety net for Sydney over the years, as she still calls for help from him before hearing the voice of Maureen taunting her again, and a dead body chasing her until she falls onto the outside of the set, where the cops and Dewey come to rescue her, with Kincaid, Tyson, and Angelina showing up late. The cops question Tyson and Angelina while Dewey and Kincaid try to figure out from Sydney what happened. Kincaid takes Sydney to keep her safe at the police precinct. Roman is in Milton's office upset because his career is possibly dead thanks to all the killings when Dewey, Gale, and Jennifer come in to confront Milton, who tells Roman to leave for his house to prepare for Roman's birthday with the cast without him. When Milton tries to deny knowing the actress Rena Reynolds, they call him out on it. After admitting that he knew Rena and realized while making the first stab who Maureen was, he finally tells them what happened during her time in Hollywood. This actually gets to the meat of another reason why I appreciate Scream 3. In the year 2000, Wes Craven and Aaron Kruger were already ahead of the Me Too movement, as we learned that Milton hosted parties where Hollywood execs would do exactly what you think to impressionable young women who wanted to get into the industry, including a young Rena Reynolds. He makes it out as just part of the industry that in order to play, you follow the rules of the game or go home. In any other movie or show of this time, we'd see this be a joke about how Hollywood operates, but Scream 3, despite honestly having the silliest vibes among the Sydney era, as it seems to lean into the made-for-home video vibe that Stab 3, the fictional movie, seems to be, along with the fact that this is a post-Columbine, and they were forced to tone down the violence in the film in response, Scream 3 actually takes this moment very seriously and makes a point of the cruel nature of Milton and how this is wrong. Something that is extra surprising about such a direction and tone is when you realize that the Scream films have all been produced by Miramax through Dimension Films up to this point, which is owned by the infamous Harvey Weinstein. So I think this is where we get some very unsubtle commentary about Wes Craven's boss directly from the man, a whole decade before he'd finally be kicked out of the industry and convicted for his actions. I enjoy that Wes and Aaron used their creative tools, and in Wes's case his star power as a director, to tell this story. Unfortunately, I don't think enough people realize what he was saying because of how people view the Scream franchise. This movie is really the major catalyst to me doing this video essay, as I think despite being seen as just these goofy slasher movies, Scream has something to say even today. Back at the police precinct, Detective Kincaid and Sydney are getting to know each other better awkwardly, and we see more of Kincaid's knowledge of films as he knows all bets are off in a trilogy, and we learn he is from Hollywood and grew up around the studios. Sydney becomes distrustful of Kincaid for a moment and questions if he asked for this case, but because of his knowledge of the industry, he is always the one assigned to cases involving it. We also dive further into the deeper traumatic theme, as they also discuss that Sydney needs to rely on her support network, which I really think is the message of Scream 3, kind of giving away that Kincaid isn't our Ghostface despite the movie trying to make him a red herring. He then gets Sydney's perspective of who her mother was and reassures her that despite all the secrets, who Maureen was to Sydney matters. It shows that Kincaid is actually listening and cares as he leans forward towards her in the conversation when she's talking about her mom. Kincaid leaves to go back to the studio as he's confident that Ghostface is another person and believes Sydney's story. Gail, Dewey, and Jennifer are on their way back to the precinct to meet with Kincaid and Sydney with everything they've learned about Milton when they get a call from Sydney telling them to meet her at Milton's house, as she and Kincaid are going there to learn the truth about Maureen from him, so they head to the Milton house to find just Roman, Tyson, and Angelina, but no Sydney. Roman, Jennifer, Angelina, and Tyson go to explore the mansion to find the secret movie screening room. Roman and Jennifer head into the basement. Roman goes into the basement, and Jennifer stays at the stairs. Meanwhile, Angelina and Tyson check the attic. Dewey and Gail can't find Sydney, so use caller ID to track the phone that called them as being in the house next to the Ghostface costume and voice changer. Dewey and Gail separate so they can't find everyone in the house before Ghostface does. Dewey manages to find Tyson. Meanwhile, Roman has apparently been killed by Ghostface already, with his body placed in a coffin prop in the basement. Gail manages to find Jennifer, though, and they run into Angelina on the way. Angelina reveals that she slept with Milton to be in Stab 3 and runs away from them in an attempt to escape, but is stabbed and killed by Ghostface instead. When the two groups manage to find each other, Tyson gets killed by Ghostface while Jennifer falls into a secret passageway that Ghostface already has found his way into and leads her to a one-way mirror, but she's killed before Dewey can shoot his way through, while she reveals that she was the killer in Stab 3. This Ghostface is very effective compared to the previous ones, as he's only left Dewey and Gale alive so far. Just as things look bad for our duo, Sydney finds her file on Kincaid's desk that makes it appear he's been watching her for a while, and gets a call from Ghostface challenging her to go to Milton's house so she can save Dewey and Gale. Sydney is ready as she takes Kincaid's pistol with her. Once more, a changed Sydney who is still afraid but willing to do what is necessary to save her friends. Unfortunately, Ghostface has a metal detector ready, forcing her to give up the pistol immediately. Turns out she has a second pistol ready and shoots Ghostface into the floor so she can untie Dewey and Gale, but he disappears just as Kincaid appears. Kincaid had put the clues together to figure out that the final act would occur at the Milton house. It even takes a knife wound to the shoulder for her from Ghostface, proving that he's there to help. Sydney challenges Ghostface to fight her one-on-one and leads him to the secret screening room, but this is what Ghostface wanted, as he shares all the secret footage he gathered of Maureen before her murder, and locks Sydney in the room with him. Here, all the answers are revealed. Ghostface was wearing a bulletproof vest the whole time, and he's Sydney's half-brother Roman Bridger, who was turned away by Maureen when he tracked her down, wanting a mother too. That's when he began filming and stalking Maureen and plotted to have her killed. He taught Billy and Stu the tricks to do it, but didn't realize they'd decide to do it again to Sydney after. Roman has Milton tied up and decides to test Sydney's conviction to see if she's a murderer, and since she doesn't do it, he does. He kills Milton and is prepared to frame his sister with the motivation of Milton being the one who ruined Maureen's life, while he finally gets to be the hero and center of attention. Once again, a Ghostface that gets caught up in monologuing.
You sly dog! You got me monologuing!
He believes the life Sydney had belongs to him, but like Sydney said, ultimately, he's spineless and the two have it out. Dewey manages to short-circuit the power and knock himself out long enough for Kincaid to find his way into the screening room, but is knocked out immediately. Sydney is about to stab Roman when he shoots Sydney once in the gut and again in the chest. While distracted by the threats from Dewey and Gale, Roman looks away only to see that Sydney's body has moved. Much like his protégés Billy and Stu, he begins to panic, looking for her as Dewey and Gale start to close in on him. Getting the brilliant idea to try and call Sydney to find her, she calls him to locate him and stabs him from behind. Just before she kills him, she reveals that she put on an LAPD bulletproof vest. Sydney then ends him with a swift stab in the heart as Dewey and Gale finally arrive. Sydney and Roman hold hands as he takes his final breath in a symbolic gesture of their relation as siblings, but also as opposites and a reflection of what Sydney could have been in a different life. Roman gets back up for the final jump scare, and Dewey keeps shooting him in the chest as Roman taunts him. Finally, with Sydney's prompting, Dewey shoots Roman in the head, truly finishing him off as Kincaid wakes up. Dewey, Gale, Sydney, and Cherokee are living out in the unknown parts of California, happy together as a found family, with Dewey even proposing to Gale finally, and she of course says yes. When Sydney walks into the home this time, she's about to put in the alarm when Kincaid, who she's now dating, is waiting with Gale and Dewey for her to watch a movie together. Sydney looks back one more time to the things that haunt her metaphorically out the door as it swings open from the air, and she walks away to finally live a life for herself. We then get red right hand for the credits. I love Scream 3 the most in the Sydney era. It has so much to offer both on the surface film lovers level, but also on a more deep level as we get a semi-conclusion to Sydney's trauma. However, Sydney's journey isn't done, as we have just one more. We are now in what I think is the weirdest of the cold opens, but I think also has to do with the fact that Scream 4 came out 11 years after Scream 3. I think with Kevin Williamson back in the writer's seat, they realized people knew the formula. We get a Stab 6 intro that has Ghostface as a Facebook stalker and killer that turns out to be the opening to Stab 7 that Woodsboro High teens Jenny Randall and Marnie Cooper are watching when Ghostface kills them. The next morning is the 15th anniversary of the original Woodsboro murders, and Sydney has returned alongside her publicist Rebecca Walters to promote her novel retelling her life story. Dewey is now the sheriff of Woodsboro, and Gale is still his wife, but struggles with writer's block. I'm gonna go ahead and admit right now that this is actually my least favorite of the entire franchise, not just of the Sydney era. I actually used to dislike this one, but have come around to actually enjoying it more each time, but It's still on the lower end of my list of favorites. One of the things I noticed is how much more bright and colorful it seems during the day shots, thanks to how films in the 2010s tended to look. The first new character we meet is Kirby Reed, who keeps recklessly driving even as she passes Dewey's house, as she's on her way to pick up more of our new cast of characters as they head to school. This includes Olivia Morris and Jill Roberts, Sydney's cousin. We learn that Jill broke up with her boyfriend Trevor Sheldon, who cheated on her with Jenny Randall. Jill gets a call from Ghostface through Jenny's phone, which scares the trio, and it turns out Olivia got the same call from Marnie's number. At the book tour stop, we meet Dewey's main deputy, Judy Hicks, before they get called to check out Jenny Randall's house by Deputy Anthony Perkins. Yes, named for the lead actor of Psycho. At Woodsboro High, we meet the film nerds Charlie Walker and Robbie Mercer, the latter being a constant live streamer, which, even for 2011, being a real-life live streamer in high school is wild. At Sydney's author appearance, the police show up because they track the phone from Randall's house to Sydney's rental car. Inside, they find bloody posters for Sydney's book and a knife along with the phone. It's then that at the school, all the students' phones start ringing as they learn about Jenny and Marnie's murders. Back at the police station, Dewey interviews Sydney while Deputy Hicks tries to stop Gail from helping. Gail wants to be part of the investigation as she helped solve the last three and is trying to find validation somewhere to make up for not being able to write. Jill, Olivia, and Kirby show up to talk about their phone calls to Dewey, Hicks, and Sydney. Sydney won't be able to leave town as she's under 24-hour police surveillance, as once more everyone is a suspect, including her. Outside, Rebecca is excited about things because once more the media is swarming Woodsboro because of these murders and bringing PR to Sydney's book. Sydney and Kirby are staying at Jill's place with her mom, Kate, while deputies Anthony Perkins and Ross Haas watch for any signs of Ghostface. Sydney checks in on Dewey and Gail, and Dewey admits that he knows that Gail is tired of small-town life and that it's in the way of her writing. Meanwhile, Trevor has snuck in through the window to visit Jill, but she's not having any of it. Sydney walks in on them and Trevor leaves, which brings back memories of Billy and her relationship. This is where things start to really connect to the theme of legacy, and on the film thematic level, it's a look at horror reboots as the late 2000s and early 2010s were filled with them, with Friday the 13th, Halloween, and A Nightmare on Elm Street being just some of them, with the last one being without any connection to Wes Craven, so I wonder if that added to his desire to explore the idea within a franchise he still was connected to a decade after he had essentially given the ultimate trilogy ending. Sydney is jump scared by Judy, who went to high school with her and seems to idolize her and the connections she made in her trauma bonding. Jill and Kirby are watching horror movies while Olivia, who lives next door, is freaking out about the fact they're in the house with Sydney, who the girls have dubbed the Angel of Death because of all the people who have died around her. They try to prank Olivia when a call from Trevor on Kirby's phone is the real Ghostface and tells them he knows what they're watching because he's in the closet. They look in the closet, but he then corrects them that he didn't say their closet, as he was in Olivia's, and begins to attack her. Sydney runs up when she hears the girls screaming and tries to run over to Olivia's house with Ross and Perkins, who aren't in their car, and she's too late. Ghostface calls to taunt Sydney, but also clues us in that she's no longer his main target. We see when she discovers Olivia's body that Sydney truly has grown from a lot of her past. While she still truly values the people who get caught in her ongoing fight with different Ghostfaces, Sydney no longer lets them lead her into believing that she's guilty for any of it. We see that the character growth throughout the original trilogy has made a new Sydney who is stronger despite what she's been through. Jill comes in to see what happened, but Sydney prevents her when Ghostface attacks them. Sydney manages to move Jill out of the way, but not fast enough to prevent a wrist cut similar to Derek's in Scream 2. Sydney manages to fight Ghostface off long enough for Perkins and Haas to arrive, but Ghostface has already disappeared again. Trevor arrives and attempts to comfort Jill, and Kirby arrives to help him bring her to the ER. While Sydney has learned to let things go and not blame herself, the town of Woodsboro doesn't feel the same, as they immediately blame the Ghostface attacks on her return. Robbie and Charlie are immediately on the hospital scene, much like the official media, as the new media, with their live stream, attempting to catch views in a similar way that old media would try to get ratings from the previous Ghostface murders, revealing the similarity between new and legacy media, and how they feed on tragedies. Gail forces them to turn off the live stream so that she can make a deal with them. She wants to work with the movie club to catch Ghostface, and figures she could get into the minds of the modern-day Randys. In return, they want to interview Sydney at the club. Because of the chaos and PR, Rebecca manages to pull new book deals for Sydney, but she's uninterested as she sees through Rebecca as just another of the same media feeding off her and other people's suffering. She fires Rebecca and cancels the book tour. As Rebecca is leaving the hospital, she gets attacked and killed in the parking garage by Ghostface. While being interviewed in front of the hospital, Dewey tries to avoid Gail's questions about how the new murders resemble the original, when suddenly Rebecca's body is dropped from the top of the hospital onto a news van. Gale tries again to get Dewey to team up with her, but he's being stubborn with his role as sheriff. The next day, Sidney shows up to the film club where they learn that this is in fact a remake. They also suggest that if the new killer really were to fit the modern era, they would be filming the kills. With that comes some of the same rules, but also new rules. The unexpected is the new cliche. Kills have to be more extreme, which so far they have been with Olivia's and Rebecca's, especially as we saw Olivia cut open and how Rebecca looked after being dropped from the rooftops. So far, the new Ghostface is following the structure with Jenny and Marnie, then Olivia as the main structures. Now all that's left is a party, which Gale and Sidney learn about, Stabathon, where the boys host a movie marathon yearly of all the films, but they won't tell them where. They refuse to have a Q&A with Sidney since the boys won't cooperate. Back at Sidney's house, she and Jill continue to connect with how Ghostface is now targeting Jill, and that connection to Sidney's own legacy, and how she copes with the losses. Kirby, meanwhile, goes to Stabathon, which is taking place in a barn house to hopefully ignore it all, and Gale has managed to locate the party, so she begins to hide cameras throughout the barn, even remaking the original time she did this by placing a camera beneath the screen where the Stab movies are being projected. Just as she thinks she's outmaneuvered Ghostface, he begins to move and cover her cameras, preventing her from getting the live feed of what's going on. Gale calls in Dewey as backup, but still goes in to fix her cameras while waiting for him. Dewey, meanwhile, calls in Hicks for his own backup when he arrives at the barn house and watches as Gale fixes the camera from inside. In another repeat from the original, Ghostface is seen from the live feed behind someone, this time Gale. Thankfully, she turns around in time to try and defend herself while Dewey comes running in just in time. The teens run out as Dewey fires at Ghostface, but not before he could stab Gale's shoulder. Gale manages to let Dewey know she saw a hidden camera that Ghostface is using to film the kills, as Robbie and Charlie suggested. Meanwhile, Perkins and Haas talk about the movie rules for cops, and how they are almost always killed in movies, especially if it's your last day before retirement, you're a rookie who found out his wife is pregnant, or your partner is better looking than you. Perkins then says he'll be right back, and they joke how, with reboots, Perkins could survive, and Haas is the one dead when he comes back. Haas decides to leave the car instead to check on things, and finds an open window. Sidney locks the door as she senses something bad coming, and is right as Ghostface kills both Haas and Perkins. Ghostface then calls to taunt Sidney about attacking Gale, and reveals that Jill has left the house to go to Kirby's. As Sidney and Kate try to escape to get Jill, Ghostface attacks and kills Kate. Hicks shows up just after that, but it's too late and Sidney takes Hicks' car to go save Jill. At the hospital, Dewey promises no more of Gale on her own as the two of them will be forever, but she tells him to catch that motherfucker. Back at Kirby's, Robbie and Charlie are also there with her and Jill, and they realize with the reboot rules the party is the false ending, and now they're waiting for the real ending. Charlie and Kirby flirt a little through testing each other's horror movie knowledge. Trevor then shows up claiming Jill texted him, which she denies, but needs to find her phone. Robbie is panicking about the fact that he was unintentionally an accessory to Gale getting stabbed, while Trevor immediately starts guessing one of the other three texted him from Jill's phone, to which Kirby questions him having a missing phone as well. Trevor corrects her that he got a new one. Hicks updates Dewey on everything that happened at the Roberts house, and he makes his way there, while at the Kirby house, they're watching Stab 7, with Kirby feeding into Charlie's flirting that Robbie starts to stream, but puts the camera on backwards when he goes back inside from being too drunk. Kirby and Charlie are about to kiss, but Trevor interrupts the good time, forcing Charlie to walk away and upsetting Kirby. Outside, Robbie realizes his camera is backwards just in time for Ghostface to come out to kill him. Sidney shows up to take Jill and Kirby, but they find Robbie stumbling up and Ghostface right behind him, chasing Jill and Sidney. Sidney tricks Ghostface into thinking Jill jumped from the second floor, while she calls Dewey to tell him where the real final act is taking place. Sidney and Kirby find each other and hide in the basement where Charlie is locked outside covered in blood. Kirby doesn't fully trust him, so keeps him locked out, and Ghostface drags him away where they recreate the Steve and Casey moment, with Steve tied up and Kirby having to answer horror movie trivia to save him. At the very least, even if, like me, this isn't your favorite of the franchise, it pays a lot of homage to the original while not just recreating it entirely. There are moments like this that really show a creative twist to it, including that Kirby actually manages to answer all but one of the questions correctly, even after panicking on the last one and answering that one before Ghostface finished the question. She then goes out to save Charlie, who stabs her and reveals he's Ghostface. Well, one of them. Sidney, meanwhile, is looking for Jill, who has disappeared. Charlie then attacks Sidney, who almost gets away when the second Ghostface shows up, revealing themselves to be Jill. They then pull the kitchen scene, with Trevor being the one tied up, and the plan for Jill and Charlie to be the only survivors, with Trevor being the fall guy as revenge for him cheating on Jill. They cast Trevor as their Billy and themselves as the new Sidney and Randy, but Randy gets the girl. They plan to release the footage of all the murders on the internet to gain fame. However, Jill wants to actually be the sole survivor and stabs Charlie in the heart and plans to set him up as Billy and Trevor as Stu. We get the theme here of legacy and internet fame as Jill is ready to claim the family legacy of victim and survivor, and with it the fame that she wants at any cost, even killing her own mother and friends. She then stabs Sydney in the gut and gets to work with setting up the crime scene. This is the ultimate twist as we get to see what could have been if Billy and Stu had been successful. The setup and mess they would have had to leave behind before the police arrived, as Jill has to make a further mess around the house and remove her prints from weapons to make it seem like she survived a brutal fight for her life. She then places herself next to Sydney's body and tries to symbolically copy her placement, a twisted version of family legacy, just as the cops and EMTs arrive on the scene. Jill gets her moment of fame as reporters surround her and believe she's a hero and survivor. At the hospital, Jill learns from Dewey that Sydney might survive as she's still in the ICU. She also wishes the best for Jill and remarks that they have twin wounds. Jill goes to find Sydney and finish the job before she can wake up and remember what happened. Dewey checks on Gail and mentions the wound remark, which Gail immediately clocks as information only the two of them and Ghostface would have. Dewey realizes his mistake and quickly rushes to save Sydney. Sydney wakes up just in time to see Jill walking in and fight for her life, once more showing the survivor skills that going through this 3 previous times gives her, even with Jill messing with the knife wound stitching. Dewey calls for backup from Hicks just before getting beat with a bedpan by Jill, who takes his gun to try and finish the job finally. Gail arrives to save Dewey, and Hicks saves her before Gail gets shot. Hicks is forced to give up her gun so that Jill won't kill Dewey, while distracted with Hicks, who Jill shoots, and Gail, she doesn't see Sydney prepare the defibrillator, and once again, this is not my favorite of the franchise, but this still is an awesome line and moment as Gail asks Jill to let her have some last words. Also, once again, a Ghostface got caught monologuing.
You sly dog! You got me monologuing!
Yeah, Sydney just zaps Jill's brains, and Sydney tells her she forgot that the first rule of remakes is don't fuck with the original. Then she shoots Jill in the heart as Jill tries for the one more time move. Hicks survives being shot with her vest, and everyone has to be reset in the hospital. Meanwhile, the media is still spreading the news of Jill Roberts as the hero, unaware of the truth yet. And that's the Sydney era of Scream. A 15-year journey of depression, trauma, and self-discovery. I think the Sydney we began this journey with truly has had a healing journey by the end, as by the time of Scream 4, she's a nearly different person who truly is done with the ghost faces haunting her, and like Mark Kincaid had said in Scream 3, she found people to surround herself with that will fight for her. In Scream 1, we saw she didn't have those kinds of people surrounding her the same way as she does by 4. Scream 2, she's closer to that, found family, but she still hadn't let her own barriers down, even though the right people were there. Ultimately, this is Sydney's healing story from her mother's murder and rape, and then her own personal trauma with the people that just wouldn't leave her alone. Obviously, I loved the film stuff, and that's what drew me to Scream initially, but this stuff, the story of not just a victim, but a survivor and fighter, is what makes the Scream franchise one of my favorites. So, thank you all for watching this deep dive into the Sydney era films. I plan to make this a thing and hope to see you all on the next Scream deep dive, where I will go into the TV series. Thank you all for watching. If you really like our content, you can check out our Patreon, which is the link down below, where you can get access to our content before it's publicly available, along with other cool goodies. You can also check out our Discord link down below if you want to become a part of our community. And finally, check out our YouTube membership community, where you can get videos early just for you, along with some fun emojis when we live stream. If you're already a member, and that's why you're watching this video a month before everyone else, I appreciate you. I appreciate the entire community that we're building, as you all have gotten me to the point where I'm closer to being able to do this full time, and pushing me to expand the content with ideas like this. So if you like the idea of me doing cool side videos like this, show support for this one. Either way, I'm going to at least finish the Scream franchise with you, and we'll go from there. I'll see you all next time. Have a good one. Bye.